I bought the DJI OM7P with my own money, so if it has any weaknesses, we'll find out today. And of course, a detailed comparison with the Insta360 Flow 2 Pro, certainly one of the best smartphone gimbals, is suitable for this. There are 10 categories that determine the quality of a smartphone gimbal. So take a careful look at all 10 categories if you want to decide between the two, because they are all important and interesting. At the end of this video, I'll tell you who would I recommend which gimbal to. Let's take a look at the design, and by that I mean the aesthetic design. At first glance, the OM7P is only slightly different from the Osmo Mobile 6. The color is identical, and the control elements also look very similar. Only the gimbal arm has been redesigned. The setup and the internal structure have been changed. In comparison, the Flow 2 Pro looks much more modern. The control elements alone give it a more minimalist and elegant appearance. At the same time, the Flow 2 Pro also has a few playful design elements that simply make it look more interesting and modern compared to the OM7P. But that is of course a very subjective opinion, and I understand if you see it differently. The handle is similar in length, and both gimbals are comfortable to hold. Both gimbals are similarly easy to use. If you have used a smartphone gimbal before, you will quickly get to grips with both. The buttons largely fulfill similar functions, for example the trigger button on the back. As we have already seen, the controls on the Flow 2 Pro are much more minimalistic, even though everything you need is there. On the other hand, the joystick on the OM7P is somewhat better defined. What I would have liked to see from DJI is a new zoom wheel. I constantly bump my finger here unintentionally and change the zoom factor without meaning to. Overall, I see slight advantages for the Flow 2 Pro in this category, especially because it simply looks much better. It's interesting to note that the technical design of the two gimbals is very similar. Both gimbals can be activated in the same way by simply folding the gimbal arm upwards. This means that both gimbals can be activated and refolded quickly and easily. The only thing that is a little more intuitive with the Flow 2 Pro is folding it up to stow the gimbal away again. And with both, the clamp can be left on the gimbal when stowing away. The tripod feet can be pulled out of the handle on both gimbals. This is a little quicker with the OM7P, because you can pull them out all at the same time. However, the feet are a little shorter, and it can sometimes get stuck when pushing them in. And more importantly, the Flow 2 Pro stands much more stable and cannot fall over so easily. On both gimbals, an extension rod can be pulled upwards out of the handle and bent by up to 90 degrees at the top end. As both gimbals were released within a few weeks of each other, it's difficult to say who copied the new design from whom, and we consumers couldn't care less. We benefit from the competition. The decisive factor is that both gimbals can be activated very easily and quickly. In addition, both are similar in weight and size, whether folded or unfolded. There are therefore hardly any relevant differences in this category. The Flow 2 Pro and the OM7P both come with the usual shooting modes. A follow mode where the tilt axis and pan axis move, a pan follow mode where only the pan axis moves, so the gimbal does not move up and down, but only sideways, and an FPV mode, which not only allows movements of the pan and tilt axis, but also of the roll axis. You can therefore also perform lateral rotational movements. The Osmo Mobile 7P has two modes in this context. In FPV mode, the smartphone follows your hand movements, including on the roll axis. In spin shot mode, you perform the turning movement with the joystick. With the Flow 2 Pro, on the other hand, you perform the rotation in FPV mode with the zoom wheel. Two separate modes are therefore not necessary. However, zooming is not possible in FPV mode. If you don't want to worry about the mode at all, you can also use the automatic mode on the Flow 2 Pro. Depending on the movement pattern, the gimbal then decides which movement it will follow and which it will not. The OM7P does not have an automatic mode, and although the automatic mode is certainly practical, I don't see a decisive difference here either. And the first big surprise for me came when I tested the range of motion. I had expected that if DJI was already changing the gimbal arm, they would also adapt the range of motion to the competition. But that is not the case. The Flow 2 Pro beats the OM7P on all axes. The Flow 2 Pro can not only be rotated significantly further than the OM7P in the roll axis. In the pan axis, the Flow 2 Pro rotates completely and without any limit around its own axis. You can therefore set it up anywhere on a tripod and be tracked all around without having to worry about the gimbal getting blocked. The OM7P, on the other hand, only rotates by 180 degrees to the left and even only by 90 degrees to the right. I would not have expected that. And there is another important difference in this context. In the tilt axis, the Flow 2 Pro rotates a little further than the OM7P, but both gimbals are very limited here. This means that the smartphone can only be moved up and down to a very limited extent. Why should that be a problem? If, for example, you are filming in flashlight mode, or taking a cinematic crane shot from the very bottom to the top, this restriction can be a problem because the smartphone rotates with the movement when the gimbal reaches its movement limit. A straight crane shot is hardly possible, and only the Flow 2 Pro features the so-called free tilt mode. For this, you pull out the stick and then turn it 90 degrees to the left. And now the Flow 2 Pro also offers unlimited range of motion in the tilt axis, and the smartphone can be rotated completely around its own axis, which now enables a completely straight crane shot, for example. This is a cool feature that especially experienced users will appreciate. Yes, of course, the main function of a gimbal is and remains stabilization. While the shots of a new iPhone, for example, are already well stabilized internally, a gimbal simply enables smoother camera movements and more cinematic shots, especially with longer camera movements. And when it comes to stabilization, there is hardly any difference between the two gimbals. Manufacturers have been reaching their limits here for some time now. Both gimbals stabilize the shots well and do what they are supposed to do. Although beginners in particular should know that no gimbal can compensate for up and down movements when walking. You still have to try to compensate for these movements by walking properly. While there are hardly any differences when it comes to stabilization, it's a different story with the second main function of a modern smartphone gimbal, tracking. To be able to use all the tracking features, you need to use the respective manufacturer's app with both gimbals. This is the only way to get the best possible tracking performance. And for this, you don't need the AI tracker from Insta360, which is sold as an accessory, nor the multifunctional module of the OM7P. Tracking in the app works excellently and very efficiently with both gimbals. Both gimbals are very responsive and recognize the subject even if it has been lost for a longer period of time. Both gimbals allow you to correct the framing when tracking using the joystick. And both gimbals can also track objects, at least in the respective app. But the Flow 2 Pro has a few unique features when tracking in the app. Only the Flow 2 Pro allows you to set the correct framing right from the start. You can define the optimum position of the subject using the so-called framing grid. The subject is then always kept in the top right-hand third, for example. And this also applies to the following shots. You don't have to adjust the framing every time using the joystick. And this can be very useful, especially if you're filming yourself with the back camera and cannot check the framing. With Tracking Plus, only the Flow 2 Pro offers a tracking feature for use on the tripod. This increases the field of view by switching off the internal stabilization and further improves tracking efficiency. Only the Flow 2 Pro can track subjects from a distance, even at very high zoom factors of over 5x and thus up to 15x. The DJI app only supports zoom factors of up to 8x. Only the Flow 2 Pro is able to dynamically adjust the zoom factor to the distance, as when the subject moves closer or further away. And only the Flow 2 Pro is capable of group tracking, that is tracking entire groups of people so that individual members are not cut off at the sides. I don't think all these features are equally important. It also depends on your needs. But the framing grid and Tracking Plus in particular are two very useful features for me. And the Flow 2 Pro has another very useful feature in this context. It has a green ring light that lights up when a subject is actively being tracked. At least if you are using the DJI app, you cannot see whether a subject is being successfully tracked with the OM7P when using the rear camera. Tracking in the app therefore clearly goes to the Flow 2 Pro for me. But what if you want to track subjects but still want to use the native iPhone camera app or a video conferencing or social media app, for example? There are two solutions for this. And one of them is Apple Dockkit. That's the integrated tracking technology from Apple. And this technology is only supported by the Flow 2 Pro and the first Flow Pro. That means there is no Dockkit support for the OM7P. Dockkit works very simply. The gimbal connects to the iPhone via NFC and can now access the iPhone's tracking function. Tracking is started and stopped as usual with the trigger button, and it works fully automatically not only in the iPhone camera app, but in every app that supports Dockkit. And that includes most apps that use the iPhone camera, such as Google Meet, Instagram, TikTok, and so on. This means completely automatic tracking without an additional hardware tracker. Sounds great, but it has a few minor weaknesses. The biggest one is that it only works with iPhones. The tracking is also not as responsive as in the Insta360 app, and not all apps are supported. For example, not the Blackmagic app. And this is where the hardware trackers come into play. And this is where the DJI OM7P has an advantage, because the multifunctional module for the OM7P is included in the standard packaging. There is also an AI tracker for the Flow 2 Pro, but that's an accessory and must either be purchased separately or as a part of a bundle for an additional $20. Both trackers work well, enable good and fast tracking of the subject, and of course also work with Android smartphones and independently of the app with which you want to use the camera of your smartphone. However, I have to say that I noticed several times during testing that the framing was wrong when tracking with the DJI module after the subject was lost. You can see that clearly here. Both allow you to control the camera from a distance using hand gestures, and both also have an integrated spotlight to improve the exposure in low light conditions. In direct comparison, they both have advantages and disadvantages. The multifunctional module of the OM7P not only allows you to start and stop a shot, you can also adjust the position of the subject in the framing from a distance. Even if this only works to a very limited extent, because tracking is interrupted in the process, a new position is assumed, and then the tracking is resumed. This means that only a lateral correction really makes sense. An upward correction is difficult to make. It also only makes sense if you are filming with the selfie camera. Otherwise, it's not possible to check the framing, but it's an additional feature. The DJI module also has disadvantages in comparison. It's attached to the side of the smartphone clip. I guess that has no effect on the balance. But unlike the AI tracker from Insta360, it only supports the tracking of people and not pets. And check this out. This is a magnetic phone mount. It attaches magnetically to the back of an iPhone, can be left there, and can also be used as a small stand. It also allows you to attach your iPhone to the gimbal even faster and without a clamp. Perhaps the most useful gimbal accessory. It's available for both gimbals, but as the multifunctional module is attached to the clamp, it's not compatible with the magnetic phone mount. The AI tracker of the Flow 2 Pro, on the other hand, is, because it's connected to the upper USB-C port, so directly to the gimbal head. And both trackers have another disadvantage. They are real energy suckers. According to The Verge, the DJI module halves the battery life of the gimbal, and even more when using the light. I have not tested the specific effects of the AI tracker from Insta360, but I assume they are similar. But, and that's also important, the multifunctional module from DJI comes with another interesting feature. And that brings us to the unique features of the two gimbals, apart from the differences we have already seen. So which features are unique to the OM7P and which are unique to the Flow 2 Pro? I think perhaps the OM7P's biggest strength in this comparison is that the module also has an integrated receiver for the mic mini. You have to connect the multifunctional module to your smartphone via cable and can then connect it to a mic mini. Unfortunately, the microphone itself is not included in the standard packaging, and the multifunctional module is only compatible with the Mic Mini and not, for example, with the DJI Mic 2. This is a shame, but it's still a cool feature. You can see this little mirror here on the Flow 2 Pro. It sounds strange, but you can use it to get a pretty good idea of the framing when you're filming yourself with the back camera of your smartphone, which on the iPhone, for example, offers much better quality than the front camera. A small but very cool and useful feature. By the way, both gimbals should have a runtime of around 10 hours without using the module or the tracker. The apps from DJI and Insta360 also come with a range of special features that can only be accessed within the app. In addition to the tracking features already discussed, there are various filters and special recording modes. For example, the Flow 2 Pro has the hoop mode for basketball games, a live mode and a widescreen mode. The OM7P on the other hand has a parent and kids mode, or the very interesting story mode where the gimbal supports you to make very special recordings. But, and please correct me if I'm wrong, apart from that, the DJI app doesn't have a single feature that wouldn't also be available for the Flow 2 Pro. Conversely, the Insta360 app offers 4 important and useful features that the OM7P does not have. You can connect the Insta360 app to a second smartphone and control the Flow 2 Pro from a distance. And you can also see a preview image on the screen of the second smartphone. This can be extremely useful for solo creators and works with any smartphone. not just iPhones. The Insta360 app comes with an integrated teleprompter feature, and you can also take 360 panel photos with the Flow 2 Pro. So 360 photos like with a 360 camera. And also very important, only the Insta360 app supports recording in ProRes and therefore in log. This can be very important for some filmmakers. With the OM7P, you have to use a different app for this and rely on the hardware tracker. I think you could see that the Flow 2 Pro has a lot more unique features overall. Okay, which smartphones are the two gimbals compatible with? And how much do they cost? Both support similarly sized smartphones and both support a maximum weight of 300 grams. In contrast to the OM7P, the Flow 2 Pro also supports somewhat smaller and lighter smartphones such as the iPhone 12 mini. For this, you should therefore choose the Flow 2 Pro. The OM7P costs $149 and the Flow 2 Pro $10 more, so $159. You can find links to both gimbals in the video description. If you use the link for the Flow 2 Pro, you will also receive a magnetic phone mount as a free gift, which easily makes up for the price difference. So which gimbal should you choose? Both are very good smartphone gimbals. And when it comes to the basic functions, both are a good choice. In my opinion, the Flow 2 Pro looks much better and comes with Apple Dockkit and a range of special and unique features. It also offers a much greater range of motion on all the three axes, which in my opinion is very important, especially for solo creators. The DJI OM7P, on the other hand, comes in the standard packaging with the multifunctional module, which also allows a connection to the Mic Mini. So if you already own this microphone and use an Android smartphone, the DJI OM7P is certainly a good choice. As an iPhone user, I would rather go for the Flow 2 Pro. Dockkit is simply the cleanest solution for tracking in the iPhone app or in third-party apps, and some of the additional features of the Flow 2 Pro are really useful. Especially as an Android user, you can consider adding the AI tracker, but don't forget, the most tracking features are available in the Insta360 app. To be honest, I would have expected a bit more from the OM7P. After all, DJI has achieved a lot in this product segment. You can find a detailed tutorial on the Flow 2 Pro on my channel. A tutorial for the OM7P will follow soon, so give me a like as feedback if the video was interesting for you. Stay tuned and see you next time.